So this is a good opportunity, I think, for anybody listening or Americans in general to realize that things can turn on a dime, and you might as well prepare for things that are unlikely, but they might happen. And when they might happen, you'll be happy that you stored your food and you have extra stuff.
So the same person, I'll respond. You have to know what the problem is first before you can actually address it. So don't think of it as coming as, the doom and gloom. That is the realization and processing that we have a serious problem here on this planet right now. Like, we're so close to a culmination of all of these same events together, moving us into a different way of life. Ultimately, this central bank digital currency, programmable money, that's the ultimate goal.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David Dubine.
And I do welcome you this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, wherever we are on this beautiful, blue, frozen, freezing, once-in-a-generational ice storm / blizzard planet. I'm here with Ransom Godwin tonight. And, we talk about these different extreme events happening quite some time, based on solar activity and the intensification now mixed with the Hunga Tonga water vapor in the atmosphere. So we have two sets of variables, magnetic field changes, but also the most water vapor ever recorded in an eruption in January of 2022 that's now reached the North Pole. So it's a full global event inbound here, and trying to put a face to what a magnetic field shift would look like in atmosphere and the movement and circulation of jet streams and cloud cells and how that might manifest for us to see it with our eyes, where governments would need to distract you from that with the Uber of distractions, because you're going to see things literally that you've never seen before. And I wanted to talk about the crop losses tonight too. There's no snow on the ground, at least in Kansas, very little. Panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, these places that grow wheat out there where the winter wheat has risen. Same here in Tennessee, knowing that with an eye on the winter wheat that emerged. It's still in the grass stage. It doesn't have that center stalk where it can go dormant yet. It still has just into, the blades of grass coming off of it. That's going to get super frozen, and America's about to lose most of its winter wheat. Now, if I was nefarious and going to push a cold front down, I would push it the exact same way, because it's going to wipe out all the winter wheat and all the wheat, anything, spring wheat that's planted, anything. It's going to wipe it out for the United States from the center all the way over here east, and anything that's out in the fields is going to get blasted and frozen. So this is an agricultural disaster.
Deutsche Bank, Citi, and Morgan Stanley are all forecasting another 25% plunge in the stock market. The only break in inflation is with a recession. Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki said, "I believe the economy is in the biggest bubble in history." Kiyosaki bought more gold, predicting $3,000 an ounce in a year. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold, and you may qualify for the No Fee for Life IRA. On qualifying rollovers, give them a call, 888-546-7020. Tell them Adapt 2030 sent you. And now on with the video.
Brr, right? I'm pretty sure that this has something to do with global warming. As you can see, almost all the midsection of Eurasia, Asia, dealing with some serious cold. Super bizarre. It was kind of expected, and you listed a few of the conditions that helped it get this way. But the problem is nobody's dealt with this in modern times for some time. So unfortunately, I imagine there's going to be people that weren't expecting it. They didn't watch the news. They didn't listen to the news. They never prepare for anything. The poor homeless people that are outside in all these cities right in the middle of that in the Midwest. Down here, we're right at the border of this phenomenon, this cold phenomenon. If it wasn't for the mountains to the west of me, I'm sure we would be in the teens right now. And just north of us, even in Amarillo, 3 degrees right now, and they're expected to drop well below zero. So I'm expecting not only lots of wildlife to die that was unexpectedly, and migrations of wildlife because of this, but a lot of farm animals dead, and unfortunately human beings that weren't prepared, adapted, or had the circumstance to keep themselves warm. Because they saw on the news that it was Antarctic temperatures in Wyoming. 42 below zero was the number I saw, and that's literally the conditions in which they say are too safe to go on the continent of Antarctica.
As far as we know, in every record in America kept, what just happened this evening in Wyoming was the fastest temperature drop ever recorded in the history of any weather ever in the entire United States. Now here in Cheyenne, this is in Wyoming here, 43 degrees Fahrenheit in 9 minutes. I'm telling you, this storm is something very unusual. Now, could it be engineered? Possibly. But, I mean, there'd have to be an enormous amount of things in conjunction. The polar vortex, I'd gone back a few weeks ago and taken a look at the column on that, and it split into what looked like human legs, where there was a space between the two, and they were getting strange circulations up there because it wasn't as actual, just, like you would consider a straw. Think about that. Large straw, it's just one circle and it dances around North Pole. Well, what had happened is that one straw split in half and turned into what you consider 2 human legs, and the air had to bend around each of those columns. And now we get this as an after effect of that. The volcanic ash is in the atmosphere. The Earth had cracks in the magnetosphere that was unexpected. Was it from the coronal holes? Maybe, maybe not. Not sure. Geoplatforming, I don't know. But all these things are in sync and happening right now at the exact same time. Even the backyard farmer is going to lose almost all production. Things that if it's not a fully heated greenhouse, you lost all your plantings or saplings or things that you might have saved from last year. Like for us, for example, we saved the papaya trees, but they only grow in the summertime. But if you save the rootstock in it, they had like a 20-gallon grow bag. Can bring that in and then get it back out in the ground. We also had a passion fruit vine. But even what you put out in terms of kale and kohlrabi and cabbages and things, that's too cold for this too. It all dies. So you got to think about the backyard farmer, anybody that's harboring winter vegetables that put out a winter garden. The industrial scale, or you're looking back at the home farmer, everything's affected on the food supply on this. It's so all-encompassing for the U.S.
We're going to have grid failures. There's food problems, the price of eggs, milk, butter, etc. All of those things are going up and skyrocketing. And then let's not forget that we're sitting on the ticking time bomb of the artificial supply chain issue that they created during this past pandemic. Now, it's not all going to happen in one weekend or anything. I'm not trying to say that about this cold front, but I am saying you're probably going to see some sad headlines, and it may be a glimpse into a trend to come of the way things are going to be in the Northern Hemisphere. War, shortage of food, shortage of energy. We've been leading up all year to this bad winter. This is funny because I've been convinced all summer. I mean, basically, like on your show, I've been talking about it. I think it's going to get colder, not hotter. They've been making everybody prep for the opposite, that the globe is warming and, we're all going to die. And looks like the reverse is going to happen, at least in the short term. And they're calling this, a storm of our lifetimes and things like that. They're already putting terms on it. But I have a feeling that this won't be the first or the last during our lifetime. And they're going to start blaming this sickness and war on the reason why they're slowly manufacturing collapse of each little sovereign country across the globe. They're using this changeover to bring in their one world government. I mean, it's plain as day to see that. But more than that, this kind of just shows you the normal stresses that society would face without engineering in the background trying to push it over the edge. I'm pretty sure that, never let a good emergency go to waste. So we're going to keep having these little emergencies, landslides, floods of the century. You notice they keep trying to convince everybody like if this has never happened before on Earth. And really, we're dealing with the light end of past events that human beings on the planet have dealt with. Meanwhile, I'm sure a lot of preppers listening to your show right now are like, yeah, whatever. I got my wood. I got all my jarred food. we're good. It doesn't matter if the power goes out or whatever. We're good here. I feel the same way here. Every time we trim trees or the neighbors trim trees or any of that, I cut it and neatly stack it in a pile so that just in case, if worse comes to worse, I can resort to Stone Age technology and at least have a campfire. Of course, storing food is going to be the problem for a lot of people, because if they didn't store it, these are the types of situations, just like I remember in 2000, the ice storms that rolled through like Arkansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and all the stores were closed and the roads were completely icy. But within 24 hours, there were people out there robbing all the stores and stuff. People with the means get stuff that's out there. So those people were not preppers. However, they did have ATVs and stuff like that to drive right over the ice and go up to all these stores, break in them, and steal all the stuff in them. And that wasn't even a big emergency. So you imagine if we did have something like a 2-week or 3-week period of below zero temperatures, below freezing temperatures, how would America react? Because I don't think that they know how to do it. And modern construction is built to be inefficient. So most of the new houses and the houses that were built in the last 20 years, they are made to give you high energy bills. And I know that because they don't seal them up the way they're built. It just doesn't seem like a cost efficient way to build homes. And we're down here by the border. So you can imagine what the Midwest and, like Colorado and Wyoming and the Dakotas and all them have to deal with. Yes, they are used to dealing with extreme winters. But what happens when the new extreme is really extreme, like what just happened? I don't remember ever a temperature dropping 80 degrees within a matter of 24 hours. I mean, that's something like on that movie, The Day After Tomorrow. Just North America and Europe just freezes overnight, and that's that. I don't think it would happen like that, but you can see things can change at the drop of a dime. People were kind of in the chat room, I'm not naming names, but they're saying like, oh, you just point out the stuff that's going wrong and you're fear mongering. No, I'm not. I just I'm pragmatic, practical about the idea that if things happen, they probably will happen. I hope they don't happen, but if they do, you should just plan for it. It just seems like common sense to be ready for this. Does your house have 30 or 40 extra blankets? Do you have a way to make fire if there is no gas or electricity? Do you have a way to have electricity at all? Do you have a way to keep your water not frozen and liquid so you can drink it, or clean for that fact? And do you have a source of water that doesn't come out of a municipal tap that may or may not be frozen, burst, contaminated, etc.? So this is a good opportunity, I think, for anybody listening, or Americans in general, to realize that things can turn on a dime, and you might as well prepare for things that are unlikely, but they might happen. And when they might happen, you'll be happy that you stored your food and you have extra stuff. This is one of those times I think that people should be happy that they live in a first world country still, where you can go out at the time being right now and get supplies. But I think that trend is going to change, where now is the time to start thinking ahead. I think it's a little bit past that time, but if you haven't started yet, this might be a wake-up call. It's just a weather front. It's extremely cold, but I guarantee you that wildlife, farm animals, and human beings are going to die during just this, couple-day period, because they didn't prepare for it, they didn't expect it, and they didn't realize how extreme it could get so fast.
So the same person, I'll respond. You have to know what the problem is first before you can actually address it. So don't think of it as coming as, the doom and gloom. That is the realization and processing that we have a serious problem here on this planet right now. The sweep of communism coming in many forms, whether it be central bank digital currencies, or you're beholden to a different type of economic system. The weather fronts, the way they can be bent, and I will encourage you to jump back to the Vietnam War and see all of the different patents for weather engineering to try to create more rainfall for the Viet Cong to disrupt their movements, whether it had been on mud roads or dirt roads, flooded out, continuous rainfall, you can make it mud, they can't move. They would send floods down the rivers there to break apart the bridges, or the impromptu bridges that they would break apart and they would lose, and also that the water was moving too fast so they couldn't send troops across the river. Also to flood into the underground tunnel system, and to make things just super slippery and messy so you couldn't even walk down a slope carrying some sort of armaments or resupply. That was in the 60s what we were doing with weather manipulation. These things are in play along with the changing magnetic field from the sun. I mean, every single space agency calls maximum, this is going to be a very deep grand solar minimum. We're talking like 6 sunspots
coming in for the maximum on the next solar cycle. It seems that it's not as powerful this solar cycle as forecast. Everybody's like, oh, it's going to be the strongest. Well, it's actually way underperforming, even underperforming solar cycle 24, the previous sunspot cycle, which was the weakest in over 100 years. And it's underperforming that. And we just had this massive volcanic eruption at Honga Tonga. Remember the Tonga volcanic eruption? They talked about it for like a week in the media, and then it disappeared. That was the largest eruption in 200 years, sending the most particles into the atmosphere, but this time it was water vapor. It was not ash and sulfur dioxide so much, but it was the largest water vapor eruption in 200 years, which is setting in motion a year without a summer. And I highly encourage you to read about 1816 after the eruption of Mount Tambora. It took a full year for the cooling to set in the following planting season, we in New Hampshire, New York, Virginia, Vermont could not grow crops. It was too cold. From an eruption on the other side of the equator a year prior. So what we saw with Honga Tonga is like 2.0, year without a summer. So now add all these things in, plus the political, upheaval we're seeing, economic upheaval, all the inflation, and you think your supply chains are going to continue to run? Like, we're so close to a culmination of all of these same events together, moving us into a different way of life. Ultimately, this central bank digital currency, programmable money, that's the ultimate goal. So there's going to have to be some knockouts of daily life before you will accept a digital rationing card. They're going to make it so ridiculously back against the wall, difficult for survival, that you will accept your new conversion from 10 to 1 or 100 to 1 of your old U.S. dollars into a new digital dollar, and at the same time to be able to accept your digital rationing card so you can buy food for you and your families. It needs to get that bad before you'll accept it. That's the problem. So when we talk about this, we are understating it, actually. We are way understating it. To get ready for this shenanigans that's about to go on to bring you into a fully trackable, traceable, programmable money system. So if you say anything against the regime that your means to food is cut off, I would be preparing for that too. You think that these things we're talking about, to have your own power sources and your own water filtration, for you to have storable foods, you're able to grow your own foods? Look at what happened in World War II. How much was disrupted and how much had to come back to the family homestead in order to get through that period. And that was a period where everybody knew how to grow food. And, you just take these chapters of history and overlay them on the unpreparedness of this current civilization. That's where we sit today. Now, where do we need to go from here? I will say one thing. I was on a call. Space agency employee I was on a call with. And they were calling, and again, I'm going to say just the space agencies, and I'll leave that as a general term, we're calling 2023 the year of fire. And I kind of didn't understand until they talked about we are about to hit into a wall of debris as our solar system transits as it does through space in the spiral arm of our galaxy on a cycle. We're coming into really low solar activity, weakened magnetic field on the sun, which means not as much, push on the bow shock to prevent debris from coming in. So they're expecting a huge amount of bolides and space debris to come raining down on the planet through 2023, enough that the general populace will notice it, and that'll be an aha moment that perhaps we are in the last days, something like this. That's their term, not mine. The year of fire is 2023. Things raining down from the heavens. If they're talking about that, do you think you might want to get prepared in case people just quit going to work one day because they just don't want to? Family's more important. Something's way more important than going to work. When you start seeing bolides rolling through. And another thing that was being forecast was a bolide of size. It doesn't matter what size. It's just of size crashing into a city, destroying enough to make international news in a population center after they have seen an enormous amount of fireballs coming through to the point where it's making news because they're so frequent and they're so big. And there's so much smaller debris, like shooting stars, thousands. This is what is forecast through 2023. Not in the very beginning, sort of after quarter two in that last half there. Anyway, do you think you'd want to get prepared for that too, maybe? That's a natural thing, a debris stream that we're going to go through. Should I not talk about it? Should I not assess the risk on that? Or is that just too Debbie Downer to talk about?
That could be, but if you knew that, I'm just saying, this is woo-woo here because I was thinking immediately, I pay attention to the latest scientific updates, and we're out there moving satellites around, we're blowing up stuff on them, we're discovering new fuel sources on the moon and new crystals out there. So that we're going to be messing around with objects in the solar system. Would it be that hard to do the math and maybe just push one of those objects? Maybe it might land in Beijing or Rome or, Detroit. I mean, anywhere you want it on the globe. And what would be said? That would be better for them. And when I say them and they, I mean those people or entities. I'm gonna go ahead out on a limb and say that we don't know who are the people at the top of the pyramid that seem to have an agenda. And right now, as a layperson, as somebody that's not super educated or anything, when I start seeing all of the headlines about shutting down power, food, the ability to stay warm in your home, how long you're going to take a shower, these things keep going. And I have to assume that all of this is related to the headlines I'm seeing about shutting down food and shutting down power. And then I think, why are they doing that? And everybody always says that. Who's they? It doesn't really matter who they is when you know that they are doing that. So it's in their best interest for massive emergency, whether it be a giant cold spell that cripples economies or some kind of rock that falls from the sky or a nuclear weapon. It really doesn't matter. These are all speculations, fears of the public. They use those as best they can to keep everybody in a perpetual state of fear, but they don't ever offer solutions. Let's think about that for a minute. What if things did come in the atmosphere and giant swaths of places in the northern or southern hemisphere, whichever place it hits, are just no-go zones, and the complete disruption of an entire planet's weather is something we would have to deal with. Now, if we're not ready to deal with a once in 100-year storm, or, I think these temperatures are, I think 40 years ago was similar temperatures from what I've been reading. But if people aren't really, adapted or ready for this kind of thing, and I mean people individually, but not just individually, but as a civilization, because I know that they haven't been updating or, fixing our grid situation since the 70s. Most of the grid that's in the United States is old technology. They keep this maintaining of balance because trying to make money off the maintenance and the distribution of it, but they're really not upkeeping it in the way that you would as a technological civilization that realizes we face certain emergencies or possibilities. So not only is it not just the majority of individuals that aren't prepping, aren't prepared, and don't know what's coming, it seems like the government is aiding in that by setting up to collapse. Am I wrong in stating that? I mean, because we've known about CME threat for God knows how long, and people know that these things are happening. And have we updated our grid in preparation for something from the sun? No, we haven't, which tells me that either they know that it's going to happen and they don't intend on fixing it because that falls into their great reset agenda, or would they even, care that impacts were going to happen and tell people? I doubt that would happen, actually. Every time we see one of these big objects go by Earth, they tell us 2 days later, hey, when you were eating Thanksgiving dinner, a giant asteroid went by the Earth. Closest it's ever been. How many times has that happened in the past 10 years? I know a lot because I read them all the time. So I don't think they would tell anyone. But back to my point, is it far-fetched to think that our technological civilization right now wouldn't use this time if they knew that there was a place to blame it on, to maybe nudge or direct certain rocks to go in a certain area? I don't know. Is that too far-fetched to think?
Well, think about it as riding on top of a natural cycle. Much like we've seen, this excuse for global warming is what we're seeing in magnetic field changes on the planet and allowing the jet streams and cloud cells to move into different areas. The elite, quote unquote, are riding on top of that natural cycle with their programs in play to accomplish more within that cycle. And so let's bring it into space debris for a moment and rods from God, tungsten rods. So what if we are entering into a debris stream, but it's not as intense as the space agencies had put out? But with that guise of Yes, there'll be some medium-sized ones. Maybe there's a large one or two. But what if the other 10 or 20 or 30 large ones are really those tungsten rods, that weapon system called rods from God, where they just use gravity on tungsten rods launched from space? Think about that, riding on top of a natural cycle. Again, it would appear as all natural. There would be no debris left over. There would be no signature radiation or anything. It would appear as a falling bolide. I'm sure somebody could catch it on, high-speed camera. Maybe the shape would be different than a actual, what you consider javelin spear. Torsion physics, if it was a ball shape, they could figure out that spin at different atmospheric drag coefficients re-entry. That's like old science from the 1940s and 50s? Ballpark figure, you can get it in the city somewhere. Okay, good enough. But it would not surprise me at all that embedded in and within some of the larger events would be actually, like I say, gravity weapons. Like, how is that going to be used by these nefarious characters? The wipeout of grain production across the planet is one thing in their toolbox, and, look at the effects that's having on closing down the Black Sea alone. Grains, fertilizer, and energy. Europe's deindustrializing as we speak. There'll be a 40% fertilizer shortage coming in through next year because Europe, none of the chemical facilities are running as of now. They shut down all industry in Europe. And then you cut the grains out. They were the world's largest exporter of grain for corns, wheat, soy, or was it sunflower oil, excuse me. But those were the nations that were lesser nations like Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea or Eritrea, however you like to say that. These are the types of nations that we're importing those grains from. So then you have to look to see which countries will go into civil unrest first, because if you're looking at even Brazil and Argentina as wheat exporters, they're not. Argentina was knocked down about 50% on its wheat production this year. And its largest buyer, Brazil, right next door, couldn't get enough, so they were out on the world market looking for 1.75 million tons, almost 2 million tons, because they couldn't get it from the next door neighbor. So Brazil's out there buying an extra couple million tons of wheat. What's the chance that Chad or the Sudan has to bid on something? It comes down to whoever has the money gets the grains, and these smaller developing nations are the ones that are going to get burnt the most. So if you wanted to cause a global chaos, you take out the food. But then what would this thing, so Ransom, just before we go on break here, I guess the 30-second answer is, throwing these rods from gods down in, having the kinetic effect in cities. I mean, what advantage is that for the elite then? To try to pass central bank digital currency? Oh, well, the city got blown apart. I don't know if that's going to work. I just don't see it doing in conjunction how one overlays on the other.
Here, I found this article right here. It's a way for them to do things that's legal. It's a way for them to get around treaties. We've been seeing a lot of video of, actually, that's been coming out lately, of a lot of little meteorites coming in. And you can kind of tell what they are by the color that they're putting off. Like what does it have, aluminum or nickel or, iron or whatever. And this article kind of puts it out plainly. Why would they do that? Because they can, and they've practiced it. And a weird little loop over to what you were saying a minute ago. That, just like the Rods of God program, or the Thor, as the U.S. Air Force is calling it, they had already done a smaller version of this. It talks about here, during Vietnam War, they used what's called lazy dogs, which were simple, solid pieces of steel, about 2 inches long with fins, and they just dropped them from high altitude out of planes all over an area, which obviously anybody that knows, if you throw a penny off of a tall building, it's like a bullet. By the time it gets to the bottom, it hits free fall speed, times its mass, acceleration and all of that. I forgot the formula, but if there were natural phenomenon that was knocking down satellites and bursting through the atmosphere, which what I was talking about is I've actually seen evidence that a lot of little meteorites have been streaking through the atmosphere all over the place, because maybe it's just because people have their cameras on all the time, but it does seem like there's more now versus 5 or 6 years ago, when people also have the same technology. So we'd have been seeing those videos coming across the pipeline of the internet. But in the last, I'm going to say year, maybe not even that long, 6 months, It seems like every day I see a new video of something streaking through the air. Sometimes, though, it's not a meteorite, it's space junk because, we got billions of stuff up there. We also have a magnetic field collapsing. Any outburst from the sun in any way can send a bunch of that junk headed to Earth. And you wouldn't know the difference between a bunch of, satellite junk or whether a high altitude plane just dropped some variation of these lazy dogs / rods from God from an altitude or even in low Earth orbit. I mean, they have so many of these programs now that they're trying to trick the public into thinking are natural phenomenon.